I would like to call the regularly scheduled meeting of the Eastview Board of Education to order. It is November 16th at 6 p.m. Roll call, please.
Quinn. Foot.
Here.
Pusslaw.
Here.
Winders.
Here.
Luffelholtz. Dahlberg.
Here.
Sen.
Here.
Please rise for the pledge to the flag.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, moving on to consent agenda. Any questions or comments?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
It's been moved by Dan, seconded by Patrick to approve the consent agenda as presented. Roll call, please.
Dahlberg.
Aye.
Foot.
Aye.
Sen.
Aye.
Winders.
Aye.
Pusslaw.
Aye.
Moving on to recognition of visitors and correspondence. We have our student council representatives with us today.
Okay. Hi.
Works just great.
Okay. All right. So last month was the first month that we did this, and we let you guys know everything that was going on with homecoming and everything, and you guys got all the message for that. So we're just going to be talking about everything that we've done in the last month since then, and then a little bit of things for the future. So over the last month or so, there's a couple things that you may have seen on the Facebook page overall in the district in general. We had weight wars, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I can talk about that. So last week we did weight wars, and all of the WOW groups collected like canned food, stuff like that for the veterans. And we raised 920 pounds. Our winners were Miss Renaissance class got first place, Mrs. Sirianni's, and then Mr. Hesselbacher's. So Miss Renaissance class, since they got first place, they'll get a pizza party. And Liam and Joey Delaney dropped off all the food and all the stuff that we brought in to the veterans, the VA yesterday, was it?
And then, thank you, Mr. Sirianni, for also helping with that. It was a lot of stuff, and with Miss Renison out, he helped and gave us his truck so we can get that all over there. The weight wars, so obviously it went pretty well, so that's something we'll be doing, in the future, maybe next year's, and we'll see how that goes. I know this is on behalf of student council for the most part, but on behalf of Leo Club, the Veterans Assembly went really, really well. The visitors were amazing, and it was really, really nice time. I know we haven't been able to do that in a while, and at least for the new Leo Club members, it was pretty nice for them to be able to do that. Lunch was amazing, and a lot of it is I like to talk to them, and they really, really enjoy that. So I had at least as many student council members and Leo Club members out there trying to talk to the veterans and understand what they did for us. But yeah, that went really, really well. I know DJ was there, and he's not here tonight, but it was really, really nice seeing him, and yeah, it was pretty nice. Another thing, so over the past couple days, I've been getting ready for our blood drive that's coming up on December 1st. We do this blood drive every 56 days, because that's when you're eligible each time. And so I like to, recruit donors, get new people, all of this. So yesterday, I had my coordinator come in and talk to our student council and Leo Club about the importance of donating. And then I had a nonprofit come in, Chasing Rainbows. It's a very new nonprofit, but it's a mom whose kid has cancer, and they know the most about it, So it was really, really interesting to hear her story, and she knew a lot about how blood, affects cancer and how important it is to get transfusions from these donors. So I think it really impacted the student council and the Leo Club for, they haven't really done a lot with this blood drive, so it's kind of nice to have them reincorporated into that. So over the next couple of weeks, we're gonna be, talking what incentives can we give the blood drives, how do we keep people at the blood drives, and coupons. So if any of you guys are interested, we got a lot of coupons and stuff like that. I know we're thinking about for the blood drive, we'd like to make that a bigger thing, and I talked to that Chasing Rainbows nonprofit, and we're probably going to be donating a lot of our profits from the month of December in student council, and then they're going to get a big donation from us, which is going to be really, really nice because we appreciate every single thing that they've done for us. They definitely help us a lot. Lastly, there's not that much this time, but just a little update. Next week we're going to be putting out little locker grabs for everyone, and we're going to be putting little Thanksgiving messages in each person's locker with a little piece of candy. But it's not as much as we're doing over in homecoming or anything, but we're still keeping busy this month. Thank you. If any questions, and if you're wondering anything, just let me know.
Sometimes it's those little things that actually make a big impact, so it's great to hear you're doing those things. And one thing you didn't mention, but the play that was put on was a great performance, so
Thank you.
thank you for all the work that you guys all put into that. Let the other cast members know, and it was seen, it was great, so.
We'll let them know. Thank you.
Anything else?
No, good work.
No,
Thank you.
excellent.
Thank you.
All right, so next we have the Benning Group. Our audit team is going to present their information.
All right, Jenny, you are on.
Well, fantastic. Oh my goodness, there I am. This is a little bit of a unique view here. Thanks guys for that, I appreciate it. I'm going to be sharing my screen momentarily. Just wanted to thank you all for giving me the flexibility to allow me to present virtually. Certainly I love being able to come out here and see everybody for the presentations, but I really wasn't that enthusiastic about doing the first drive in the snow in the dark and having to drive that extra hour and a half tonight, so I do appreciate that. I am going to see, technology, it's a wonderful thing. You would think by now we'd all have it figured out. So I'm gonna see if this is working now. Okay.
We can see the presentation up on the screen.
All right, you can see it, perfect, good job, all right. So, we'll make that a little bit bigger for everybody. So yes, we just finished up the audit for the year, and I'm going to go over some of the high points of the audit, so that way we're just touching base on some of those major things this year. Certainly if there's any questions, wave at me. I can see some of you in the presentation there. I can see TJ and Glenn for sure, so if there's any questions, maybe those two can be the designated waivers to ask questions along the way. I'm going to start first. I always like to start with a conversation about the audit process. We always do the AFR for ISBE's purposes as part of the preparation of all of the materials for the year connected to the audit. As part of ISBE's AFR, there's always this calculation of the estimated financial profile score for the year. And so this year, I just brought that up here on the screen real quick to share that with you. Your estimated financial profile score for the year is 3.9, and this is again on a 4.0 scale. It's down just slightly from last year. Last year's score was a 4.0, and the reason for the decline this year was because you did have quite a bit of debt that was issued for the year, and that is one of those, if you look at the last factor there on that list of factors, it is the last one there, so because of the additional debt issued, there was just a little bit that was taken off of that part of the weighted score, so that's what brought you down to that 3.9. Moving on then, I'm going to move into the conversation about the actual financial financials themselves. And, all right, good, I can see, it looks like all of you are taking a look at the same page that I am. So I'm actually moving over to the audit report now. So if you have copies of the hard copies in front of you, I'm gonna be starting on page 7 of your report. And please forgive me, I'm gonna try to remember how the PDF pages that I'm looking at align with the hard copy pages that you're looking at. So hopefully we'll be able to stay on track there. This first page is, of course, your balance sheet for the school for the year. So just giving that cash position as of the end of the year across each one of the funds, along with your fund balance for each one of the funds at the end of the year as well. And because you use cash basis reporting, I know I've mentioned this in the past, not a whole lot of other types of either assets or liabilities that are thrown in the mix there, so it's pretty straightforward. Cash generally equals fund balance in total as of the end of the year. The next page then shows the actual results of operations for the year. So this is the revenues for the district and the expenditures for the district for the year. So you can see this again on a fund by fund basis here. Each one of the funds did perform pretty well this year. You had a couple that performed at a slight deficit, but I believe that was planned spending in each one of those. Certainly the most activity that you can see this year, a little bit different than what we've seen in most years, is down in the other sources and uses of funds area. This is where your bond issuances are accounted for, as well as the movement between the funds, and moving the working cash bond proceeds out of working cash and into capital projects for those building projects you got this year. That's all accounted for down in that other sources and uses of funds area. So as I said, biggest changes here, definitely the bond area. And that brings us down to your fund balance then as of the end of the year. Now, behind these pages, as I mentioned in the past, are several detailed pages, starting with the education fund and moving through all of the funds of the district. We do go through each item of revenues and expenditures on a line-by-line basis, showing actual versus budget. So if you're really interested in getting into any of the detail on that, certainly feel free to dive into that. I'm going to switch now, and I'm going to fast forward quite a bit in your financial statements here. We're going to go all the way to page 57 of your report and talk about the fund balance at the end of the year in detail. So looking at this in, I like to use the analogy of looking at this in buckets. You know, you have fund balances in total as of the end of the year, but how is that really divided, and what's your true fund balance reserves when we get to the end of the day? So this table is about the best way that we've found to present that. This is a required table from Illinois CPA Society, and through ISB purposes, we are required to show this table. ISB uses two definitions of your fund balance. Regulatory basis is what's shown in those last two columns there. That is, for ISB's purposes, they only have reserved and unreserved. And according to government accounting standards, those are on the left-hand side of that column there: non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned. Non-spendable, you don't have anything in that category. That would be things if you had been given, say, an endowment fund or something like that, you literally were not able to spend. That would be what falls into that. Very few schools actually have something like that. Restricted funds then are those usually coming from an outside source that must be spent for a specific purpose. And in your case, those specific purposes are generally your grant funding, which, if you're looking at the education fund there, you've got restricted balances of about $271,000 at the end of the year. $94,000 of that was restricted for grants at the end of the year. The rest of that balance is made up of activity funds for $176,000 at the end of the year, because those funds, of course, can only be used for activity fund purposes within the district. And then the various other categories of your funds, some of the funds are just restricted because of, say, debt service, for example, can only be used to service the debts of the school. The committed column is for anything that the board has made some sort of formal action, either in the form of a contract or a resolution of some sort, to commit to pay out of fund balance at the end of the year. And in your case, as it is with most of the districts in the area, you have teachers' contracts that run through the end of August, so the committed funds at the end of the year represent those teachers' contracts that have been committed to be paid in July and August through the end of that contract. The assigned funds are those that can be earmarked forward into the future, either for a specific project or for a specific purpose. And it's a little bit less formal than having a contract or a resolution that the board would have to approve. In this case, what generally happens and what we've done for the past several years is we have assigned forward the early tax receipts that you get in the month of June. Because you're really not intending to spend those proceeds from the tax distribution in this fiscal year. It's really intended to fund the next fiscal year. So that's what is represented there in the assigned funds. And you'll only see that for education, operations and maintenance, and working cash, because the other funds are actually restricted to being used for those purposes. So those three funds, education, O&M, and working cash, are really the three quote unquote unrestricted funds. So that's why we have the assigned funds in those categories. And last but not least, anything that's left over at the end of the day is the unassigned funds. So that is definitely something that's important to look at. You know, when you're looking at your fund balance in total, you're looking at about, just using the education fund as an example, you're looking at about $3 million worth of fund balance at the end of the year. But when you take a look, deeper dive into each one of the components of the fund balance, what you actually have in your unassigned reserves at the end of the day is about $1.9 million instead. So just something to keep in mind, definitely something I like to highlight for the boards, because we get a lot of questions on that from across the districts that we work with. What are our actual reserves? All right, moving forward, I'm going to fast forward again to the end of the report here. I know many of you have heard my presentations in the past, so don't want to spend a lot of time digging into the details here. I know that you all have the reports in front of you. Just going through a couple of the schedules here at the back as far as what you're looking at. I'm on page 93 of the report. This is a schedule that shows any restricted tax money that's coming in for any particular purpose, and in your case that would be the special education levy and driver's education as well. And the fact that that was fully expended in both of those situations before the end of the year. As well as this is the schedule that we use to track your the 1% sales tax money that's coming into the district. So you had about $576,000 come into the district this past year. You did use about $212,000 of that in order to pay for some of those bond payments before the end of the year. So what's remaining in that restricted money for the 1% sales tax is about $893,000 at the end of the year. So just good for tracking purposes there. The next page shows the last 3 years worth of tax levies on a detail level so that you can see each one of the levy line items there. Always a good information to have here when you're starting your levy conversations this month, carrying over into next month. We found that this is really good, useful information for the districts that we're working with. One thing I did want to point out here, in case anybody is diving into that actual versus budget information and you notice that your property tax revenue line item is a little bit short of budget, one of the reasons for that is because, as you can see here in the table, what was received in the current year for the early tax distribution in June was about $686,000. And we compare that to, in this same table, you can see in the middle, last year's early tax money was about $990,000. So it certainly came up a little bit short there. A lot of times that has to do with when the county actually gets those property tax bills out and when the first installment due date is, because that will a lot of times determine how quickly they can get those tax disbursements out to the various taxing bodies within the county. So certainly this was a trend that we were seeing across the county for the year. The next item is kind of the 30,000-foot view of that tax schedule, looking at each one of the last 10 years for the levy year and what fiscal year that falls into, what your assessed valuation at the total district level has been, and what the total tax rate, as well as the tax extension for the year. So again, lots of good historical information here as you're talking about your levies. The next schedule then is information that we've taken out of the AFR. We've taken 10 years worth of some statistical information here, operating expense per pupil, as well as your average daily attendance figure, and then what the total operating expense has been. Certainly there is no surprise here that the operating expense per pupil has increased We have seen that same type of increase across each one of the districts that we work with. Definitely salary pressures are one item, as well as just the cost of supplies has risen quite a bit this past year, cost of fuel and such. So that operating expense per pupil increase from year to year is definitely something that we are seeing across all of the districts that we work with. And last but not least, we also have this schedule of the fund balances adjusted for tax receipts. Basically goes back the last few years and shows you if you did not have that early tax money in your fund balance at the end of the year, where would you be? And what we're specifically looking for here is looking to make sure that you hadn't had a fund that would have possibly run into a negative balance had it not been for that early tax distribution. Or even just to see what the impact on your fund balance is from getting that early tax distribution, as well as seeing some history of what you have received in the past for that. So, again, some good history information. Behind that in the report, you'll see the additional pages that are devoted to the single audit that we had to do for the district. I'm just going to highlight one of those pages here real quick, and if you can forgive me scrolling for just a moment here. The schedule that is immediately behind our next opinion page is the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. Good comparative information to see. There's a lot of detail in this schedule, but when we get down to the bottom line, you can see that the current year's federal expenditures were $1.4 million, in compared to last year's federal expenditures were about $860,000. So certainly an increase there this year. Definitely a lot of ESSER money and CARES Act money floating around between all of the districts this year. So we have seen a lot more districts subject to these single audit requirements than we have in the past. As part of our evaluation for the single audit then, we did have a couple of findings. I'm going to discuss those in more detail when we get to our management letter here in just a moment, but just wanted to pause real quick and see if anybody had any questions on the financials at this point.
No questions, Shane.
All right, which means since I can't see you, I've put you all to sleep at this point, so we'll see if we can wake back up a little bit, right? All right, I jest, of course. So here we have our management letter, and this would have been included with the packets that you received as well. Obviously, this is a lot shorter letter, so we usually take some time to go through this each year. This is the letter that we as auditors are required to give to you as a governing board of the district each year. It goes through some of the highlights of what is required and what an audit actually entails. And I know that many of you have, again, heard this from me in the past, and I can spend a lot of time on that. One thing I was going to highlight here for you real quickly is that whether you knew it or not, you had an accounting standards change this past year. There was a new accounting pronouncement that was put into place as of June 30th in any fiscal year entities that fell into June 30th. It involves leases for the district. And essentially in the past, the way that leases were accounted for was that you either had two options. It was either accounting for a lease as a rental type of arrangement or accounting for a lease as more of a finance purchase agreement. And under this new standard, pretty much everything is accounted for unless it's a 12-month term or less. Everything is pretty much accounted for now as that first purchase finance arrangement. So it changed a little bit of the connotation of how we account for leases. There is a reference here, it references back to the financial statements, note 18, goes through a lot longer description. I'm not going to tie up a lot of time because it did not have a significant impact on the district this year, but just wanted to make you aware that that was out there. All right. We get into then one of the areas where we did have a finding this year, and one of the findings that we had was because we had quite a few significant adjusting entries as part of the audit this year. So this bullet point presentation here at the bottom of the letter that you're looking at goes through just an overview of those adjustments that we ran into as part of the audit. First item was also something that impacted those budget tactical figures that you were looking at in the report. There was a payroll adjustment that happened in fiscal year 21, so in the summer of the prior year. There was a change in the way that TRS required those 2 months of July and August to be accounted for and reported to TRS because they wanted to incorporate those into the fiscal year that they applied to. So a lot of districts had these same types of growing pains last year and trying to figure out exactly how to process those. What ended up happening was that an additional payment got processed in FY21 that we had to adjust for in last year's audit. And the way that that got reversed out within the district's accounting system actually looked as though the salaries had decreased in FY22. And that was something that we believe had impacted the decision to decrease those line items in the salaries when the amended budget was passed earlier this spring. So that is one thing that we just wanted to mention, again, in case anybody's digging into the detail there on the actual versus budget line items. If you're seeing that salaries were way over, obviously there have been salary pressures everywhere, but this was also something that was a contributing factor to that. So in a sense, we ended up having to put those salaries back on the books because of the way that entry was crossing fiscal years. We also had cumulative adjustments in the amount of about $150,000 to get the student activity fund cash and fund balances, revenues and expenditures recorded properly within the education fund. And this is something, if you all recall from last fall when I came out to visit you, that was a new accounting pronouncement last year, first year that it went into effect. That the activity fund balances and all of the activity for those had to be reported as education fund revenues and expenditures, and then that cash has to be reported as an asset at the end of the year. And we did also see a lot of districts that had issues with this because it was a new program and it needed to be set up a little bit differently than things had been in the past. So this is something that, again, when we look at the entire picture of how we had to put those balances back on the books and get everything recorded correctly, it ended up being adjustments of about $149,000. The next item was a $72,000 item. I think I round a lot on these presentations, so there's the actual detail here, but about a $72,000 item. There was a bus purchase that was recorded in FY21, but that check was held and the bus wasn't actually delivered to the district until FY22. So again, just an item that's crossing fiscal years, and so that's something that we had to adjust for this year. There was a little bit of an adjustment from the lease activity. I know I mentioned that it didn't have a really significant impact on the district this year, but there was a new adjustment that we had to post as a result of that for about $45,000 within the transportation fund. So anytime you have a new lease is initiated, in the year that it is initiated, you end up having to capitalize that asset as if you bought it outright that year, and so that was part of the adjustment here. I believe it was for an activity bus, if I remember right, or one of the district vehicles. We also had to make some adjustments to the way that grant revenues and expenditures were reported. If you recall me saying this in prior years, is being pretty particular about which accounts are being used to account for all of the different grant funds, and the different programs each have their own home in the ISB system, and expenditures have to match up with those grant programs as well. So we had about $137,000 that we had to move to make sure that that was in accordance with ISB guidelines this past year. And then one of the things that's a little bit out of the ordinary, because it's not something that you do every year, is whenever you have a new bond issuance, it seems like there's usually some adjusting to gross up the proceeds to the gross amount, because there's always the bond fees, premiums, et cetera, that need to get adjusted properly. And so we did end up having to make an adjustment for about $444,000 in order to get all of that recorded properly for these bonds. So, as I mentioned, a few more adjustments than we had in prior years, and they were significant in dollar amount, and because we had such a significant dollar amount there, we did have to list that as a finding in this year's audit.
Jenny, if I may, just regarding those adjustments, is there anything that, from a district standpoint, that we could have done to catch those earlier, or to make sure that they're in the right buckets? Or?
Yeah, that was something that TJ and Lisa and I talked about to some extent in our wrap-up meeting. One of the things that I did suggest at that time was, I know sometimes if there's no impact of our adjustments on fund balance. So for example, the adjustment that we made just to move grant expenditures or revenues into the correct accounts, but at the end of the day, it's still the same net income and there's no net fund balance impact. Sometimes the districts don't always record those adjustments, and that harkens back to when you had one of the older software programs actually didn't allow you to go back and make that adjustment in a prior year, where SDS will allow you to make that adjustment as far as I'm aware. So one of the suggestions that I made was to actually go back and post all of the detail of all of the adjustments that we made into June 30th, 2022 balances, so that way what's in your financial system is complete and matches with the audit. That way, when getting to the end of the next fiscal year, you've got something comparative to take a look at. Was there something, going back and looking at the general ledger and the journal entries, was there something that was adjusted as part of the audit this year that needs to be kept in mind before the entries are given to us at the end of the next fiscal year? So that was one of the recommendations that we had there.
Thank you.
All right, and because
I have a
again,
question.
Sorry, yeah, I do have one quick question.
Yeah.
Is the district then at risk of having to repay any of those funds under the amounts?
not any of those funds specifically, although there may be something on the ESSER funds, which we'll get to in just a moment on the next screen.
Okay.
Yeah, that it's part of the next comment in one of the other findings that we had. I just wanted to highlight that because of the significant dollar amounts that we had to make as adjustments this year, and we had a lot of different factors going in between the bond issuances, the new lease standard, the new activity fund standard from last year, changes in the TRS program. So you had a lot, it's like the perfect storm of a lot of different factors all moving against you this year as far as the size of the journal entries. We did though, because of the size of them, we did have to consider that to be a deficiency this year. In addition to a finding, we did step it up to be a deficiency this year. Now again, with some additional review at the end of the year, like I had mentioned, posting some of those journal entries to the FY22 balances, so you've got some comparative information to take a look at, or even just looking at the structure of some of the journal entries that we made to be able to see what needs to be adjusted and then replicate that before we get those entries next year. Those are all things that can be done. So I have no doubt that this deficiency can be cured next year just with a little extra work before we get the numbers. So on the last page here, and this is something that, as you mentioned, I'm not sure who threw out the question to me. I can only see a couple people here. But the question of whether or not you would have to actually repay any grant funding or anything like that, that was one of the things that we ran into when we're looking at these, in particular the single audit procedures, because we're auditing federal funded programs in particular. And of course, all of the CARES programs are getting a lot of attention right now because they're brand new programs. They're considered to be high risk because they're so new and because there's so much visibility of those programs right now. And so as we were reviewing all of the grant expenditures, we did see a few expenditures on the quarterly expenditure reports that didn't have supporting documentation. And so that's one of the things that we always have to look for. If we don't see the documentation, we can't prove that those funds were spent properly. And so we have to call that, it's actually called a question cost in our report. And so that was kind of the comment here in general, is the fact that anytime you're working with ISB and anytime you're working in particular with their grant programs, the grant revenues, the grant budget, the grant expenditure reports, and then where that expenditure actually lives in the general ledger, the financial statements of the district, all has to be in alignment. And if there's any of those pieces that are out of alignment, there's always a potential that ISB or even above ISB could come back and say, no, we want our funds back. So let me flip over and see if we can find that dollar amount here. Sorry, again, sorry for the scrolling here. It wasn't significant. I just wanted to double check that. It was a total of 2,168. So when you're looking at some of these ESSER programs, they're fairly large programs. So the fact that you only have 2168 in what we term question costs, unsupported costs. That's really not necessarily indicative of a program that is not performing well at all. It's just, cleaning up the documentation a little bit, making sure that everything is supported 100%. What's ironic is that when we're doing these tests, the federal level for reporting question costs is actually $25,000. So in the federal world, if we were not working within ISBE's world, if it was less than $25,000, we wouldn't even have to report it as a question cost. However, ISBE's threshold for reporting question costs is 0. So if there's $1 worth of something that can't be supported, they want to know about it. So to answer your question, kind of a long answer to your question, it appears as though they may come back and question about $2,000 worth of costs. It may end up having to get sent back, but these are multi-year programs, so it is possible they may allow you to carry that over and use that on some of the other expenditures that are coming through.
Thanks for clarifying that. It was just a quick question. When I looked at the dollar amount, saw it was only $2,000. I brought up exactly what you mentioned. It was just, why would it be a fine for such a low amount if it was? But that completely explains it, so thanks, Jenny.
Yep, you bet. So with that, those are really our only comments this year. We were really excited to see that everybody filed that statement of economic interest on time this year, so we didn't have to have that as a finding for the single audit. So congratulations, all of you, for making sure that got in. So that's, and I kind of joke about that one because that is one of the most common findings that we have, and it's such a ticky-tack finding, so I'm just always happy when we get through one and we don't have anybody that missed the deadline for filing, so that's a good thing. So definitely keep on that. But actually, the audit went pretty smoothly this year. Like I said, we had some large adjustments. Took a little bit for us to wade through all of the detail on some of those larger adjustments, but for the most part, things went very smoothly, and as always, we really enjoy working with all the staff out there. So any other questions for me?
I believe, Donna, did you have a question?
No,
Oh, okay.
no. I did, but it wasn't significant.
All right, no other questions, I don't believe none. Thank you very much, Jenny, I appreciate you spending the time here to get things in order.
All right, thank you all very much, and again, appreciate the virtual option tonight with a little snow on the ground. I promise I'm not always such a wuss, so next year I hope to see you all in person again.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to recognition of any additional people that wanted to speak to the board tonight. Okay, nobody, so we will move on to staff reports, starting with Mr. Heyer.
All right, first one, PT conferences. We had our first fall parent-teacher conferences on the 20th and 21st. Great, I love that feel coming back. Oh, do you want me to? No. That's up to you.
Just so that way.
Yeah, not a grab it. Thank you.
Great turnout, just love the atmosphere. We had public library even had a table set up, and we're handing out things and talking about Hoopla, this great online app that people can download books and all kinds of things, and Boy Scouts table and the kindergarten raffle, and anyway, it was fantastic. So great start for the PT conferences for the year. The 28th, we did our kind of annual Halloween celebration stuff. It's kind of tied in with character counts thing, where we do the kid parade that lasts a whole minute, but they love it. And then we kind of tied it in with the character piece where kids would earn a dance and snacks and all the things that come with that. So anyway, it was a great time. We recruited Mrs. Schoenhoff to be the ultimate DJ, and we realized what a rotten sound system we have in that round gym, by the way. So we might have to look at that down the road, which isn't much anyway. PTO, thanks to PTO, they kind of got us a plethora of snacks and glow sticks and all the jazz that the little kids just absolutely love. So they did a great job as usual, so we definitely appreciated that. We did have our pumpkin run as well this month on the 20th of October. Great group of parents and grandparents came out, you know, and like I said, it doesn't last long, but it's just an awesome, fun, you know, 20 minutes for each group kind of running. Mr. Ayers did a great job with the race again this year. I kind of listed out our winners, top 10 kiddos on there. And then kudos to Jenna Tompkins, who was selected as the Anderson Weber November Teacher of the Month. So she's one of our first grade teachers this year. She's in her, second year teaching. She's fantastic, so certainly a deserving recipient. And then before, I didn't have it on here, but TJ had sent out something last week about School Board Members Day. And so I guess I'm delivering some gifts from Mrs. Sands' classroom. She wanted to thank you guys, so she had kids write a letter to each of you and all that jazz, so thought I'd hand that out to you. Absolutely. Gotta take a letter too. Perfect, I think that's it for me.
All right, any questions for Mr. Hunter?
Thanks, Wes.
Thank you very much. This is great. Much appreciated. Thank you, Ms. Sand, for doing that.
Absolutely.
All right, moving on to Mr. Sirianni.
So winter activities are all in swing. The junior high boys have had a good start to the season. Both 7th and 8th grade, I believe, are undefeated after, I believe they played 6 games so far each, so good start to the season. Girls basketball has their second game tonight over in Warren for the Thanksgiving tournament. High school boys start games next week. This year they're playing in Scales Bound for a Thanksgiving tournament instead of River Ridge. And archery has started practicing, and I know that they have a meet coming up here in early December on a Saturday at the gym, so lots of things starting to happen. High school play, which had been mentioned earlier, you know, Mrs. Kinkle and Mr. Lang and the cast and crew, very entertaining. It's always neat to see the different personalities of high school kids once they hit the stage. So always fun to watch. Veterans Day, which had been mentioned earlier, but you know, very, very well attended. I don't remember the exact number, but I believe we were around 35 veterans and guests that came with them, and not all of them stayed, but over half stayed for the lunch. So some great conversations and all kinds of very positive comments about being able to do that again. So as long as no more pandemics hit us, we will be continuing that annual tradition. And the last item I had was just the mention of the Illinois report card, which we're going to touch on here in a little bit with a presentation that we have later in the program. So, any questions?
Thank you.
Thanks, Wes.
Thank you, Mr. Sirianni.
You're in full swing on activities, aren't you?
Mother Nature's cooperation.
Yeah.
Darren's not looking for any hobbies.
All right, moving on to Mr. Potts.
All right, thank you. First of all, on the transportation side, there was a lot of things going on in the city of East Dubuque in terms of road work and roads closed and roads reopening and that. So we think about it as, you know, the pain for us just getting around, but we don't really think about it in terms of a bus and what that does to bus routes and things like that. So just really appreciate the transportation department and what they went through. I think Jeff put on here somewhere how many days that Badger Road was closed. 48 days of rerouting routes for that was quite the trick, but got it done, and we're back up and rolling, so to speak. So he also mentioned in his report that we're looking. This is the year that the 4 buses that we leased come to the end of that lease. If you remember back when COVID hit and we weren't in school, for that period of time. We had some buses that weren't run very much. So 2 of those 4 buses have been on short routes, and the mileage on those buses are very low. So we are gonna purchase 2 of those buses outright, and then extend the lease on the other 2 for another 3 years. So that will be coming to the board, but just as a heads up, how we're gonna handle that situation, because we talked about that a few years ago. Phase 2, just a quick update. If you've been in the back, you see a big flat piece of land, which is great. It's ready to go. They worked really, really fast, really got ahead, and actually I drove to a meeting last week with the superintendent from Galena, Mr. Vincent, and he said that they are way ahead on their project too, which is also being done by Sostrom. So that is good for us. The further ahead they can get on that, then when the spring rolls around, the quicker we can get to things, as long as Mother Nature works with us a little bit. So, and then finally from me, this year is moving really, really quickly. Before our next meeting in December on the 14th, remember we talked last month about moving that up. We will put a calendar committee on the agenda as long as it works for the people on that. So next week I will put that out to staff for input, get their feedback, and then bring that to that committee on the 14th so we can start talking about what next year will look like. The construction that we will have going on shouldn't really affect the calendar because it's going to be essentially behind the school. But there is some remodeling of the shop area and some work that will be in this hallway. So it will probably be a similar calendar, probably won't be one where we move up much. You know, we'll still want that extra time to get things done, but it doesn't look like something where we're gonna have to push the start date back. I know that Galena this year started very early, and next year they're not starting until after Labor Day because of the construction. I don't foresee something like that, but it's something for us to, you know, talk to the contractors about and just make sure that we're on the same page with them and on the same timeline. So, and I can't remember off the top of my head who's on that committee, but I will send out the invite to those folks. So.
Thanks, TJ.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, TJ. All right, moving on to old business. Anything anybody wanted to follow up on?
Question, how's the resource officer working out now that we're almost through the semester?
Yeah, I'll let the principals both weigh in, but from my perspective, we put him on a schedule. We kind of created a schedule for him and kind of a half hour by half hour itinerary each day, and that has worked out really well. I know it's been great having him in the lunchroom and just being visible before school, after school, and that sort of thing. So I think it's been a very positive situation for us.
I would say the biggest challenge that he had was working pre-K through 12, differentiating the type of relationships to develop with the different age of kids. And I think that's progressing, and I think that's a good sign, because you gotta become friendly with the younger kids for them to be comfortable with you, but at the high school level, being friendly is not gonna be a good thing. So differentiating when he's in one building and how to interact with the kids, that's been a growth.
I'm gonna just jump on that. The relationship part's probably been his biggest asset in elementary, because now that he's finally getting to know some of the kids, in the beginning, I was like, oh, what am I gonna have him do? And, it's a smaller window of time, about 1 o'clock to the end of the day, to 3:05 or so. But now that he's built some relationships with the kids, he's pretty busy, and it's been really good in that aspect of it. And it's really been definitely an asset in the elementary. And in all honesty, there's been some situations that I've just called and said, hey, can you come down from the high school and be down here for a situation or two, so it's been really good that way so far, so, and kind of like, Darren had mentioned, that relationship is, I would assume drastically different, the elementary compared to, high school kids, so.
And I think one of the questions that, this group had prior to this was, he's an employee of the city, but he's in our school, so do we have any say over what he does, or how does that all work? So after about 6 weeks of the school year, I sat down with Luke and just said, here's the things that I'm gonna go through with Jeremiah and talk about the thing, here's the feedback I've gotten from the teachers, good, bad, or whatever. And Luke said, yeah, this is great. Just be really honest with him and, let him have it. So after that point, it's been really good because he takes that feedback and he can be extremely forthright and just say, do this, don't do this. We don't want you doing, this type of thing with staff or students, or we need you to do more of this. And he's been really receptive to that, so that's been good.
Yeah, when I talked to him, he seems pretty happy with it. I just want to get your guys' perspective too.
Any other questions or any old business that anybody want to discuss? All right, moving on to new business. 6.1 is an action item to move the December board meeting from December 21st to December 24th, 2022. December 14th of 2022.
Still be at 6 o'clock.
Still been moved by Dave, seconded by Don. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, same sign. All right, that carries. We'll move on to 6.2, which is to approve a choir overnight trip to Luther College, January 8th and 9th of 2023.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Dan, seconded by Dave to approve the choir overnight trip to Luther College, January 8th and 9th of 2023. Roll call, please.
Send,
Aye.
Dahlberg,
Aye.
Pussmal,
Aye.
Winters,
Aye.
Foot.
Aye. Moving on to 6.3 is the resolution abating the tax heretofore levied for the year 2022 to pay debt service on general obligation school bonds, alternate revenue source, series 2020 of the district.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Dave, seconded by Patrick to approve. Roll call, please.
Foot,
Aye.
Winters,
Aye.
Pussmal,
Aye.
Send,
Aye.
Dahlberg.
Aye.
Moving on to 6.4 is resolution abating the tax heretofore levied for the year 2022 to pay debt service on general obligation school bonds, alternate revenue source, series 2022B of the district.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Don, seconded by Dan. Roll call, please.
Pussmal,
Aye.
Foot,
Aye.
Winters,
Aye.
Send,
Aye.
Dahlberg.
Aye.
6.5 is informational in regards to the school board member day in Illinois, November 15th, 2022. So, thank you, to Ms. Sand for providing these for us. And I don't know if you guys did, I got a couple emails yesterday from some different people. Thank you for the support. So, it's nice recognition, so thank you.
Absolutely, we appreciate what you do on many of those things. Thank you.
Glenn, if I could interject on that note, I'm not a big social media person, but somebody brought my attention yesterday to something that was on Twitter, and it talked about an elementary student asking their teacher what a school board member was. Did any of you see this?
I did not see that.
And I just thought it was perfect, because the kid asked the teacher, what do they do? And she explained, and, well, how much do they get paid? Nothing. Well, why would they do that? And so, basically, the idea that, yes, you're volunteering your time to do things that not a lot of people want to do, so.
It's funny you say that, because Mrs. Sand talked about that, about the discussion with her class was great. But she said, so do they pick what we have for lunch then? Do they they were very into how it impacts them directly. They really wanted to know that part of it. She said it was a great discussion. She said it was really fun.
That's because when kids ask us about lunch, we say it's all the school board's choice.
You claim that, Clint Foot.
Filet mignon. I will be here.
Good stuff.
Alright, moving on to 6.6, informational FOIA request regarding the purchase order vendor information.
Yeah, that's
Just a standard.
standard one that we get every once in a while.
Alright, moving on to 6.7 is informational regarding awarded school maintenance grants.
Yeah, so this is the $50,000 matching grant that we apply for every year. Last year, we received it, I believe we talked last year, we had the 2 boilers that we were gonna do the project on in this building. So we knew that if we got the grant last year, it would go for the first boiler that we paid for last fiscal year, and this year we received word that we would get it, so that would go towards the second boiler. They're actually already installed, so that's great. And we got money, we got $100,000 in the last 2 years to help offset the cost of some of that, so it's great.
Fantastic, thank you for the work putting in for that grant. Alright, so moving on to 6.8, informational regarding the Illinois report card.
Alright, so I do have a PowerPoint here. Pull that up. So, each year we get the Illinois report card, and it comes with a lot of information. So I have a few quick slides that I will talk about the school district first of all, and some of the things that were scored upon, and give just a few definitions too, because some of it is it seems like terminology that we should know, and always the state of Illinois makes it a little bit more difficult than it needs to be with some terminology and things like that. So pretty straightforward stuff though. This is the district snapshot. So obviously we have the 3 schools. That 84% graduation rate, if you remember last year, this is what was reported on in the one that I threw a little temper tantrum about, because the graduation rate is figured as the students that start in East Dubuque in 9th grade and graduated from East Dubuque in 4 years is how it's reported. So if a kid leaves our district and goes somewhere else, it may figure against our can figure against our graduation rate. So you have to remember the difference between graduation percentage or dropout rate as a difference than the graduation rate. So how it's figured and how it is presented is a little bit of a different thing. So we'll come back to that when we get to dropout rate. So 7% student mobility, that's up a little bit from years past. I know that we have seen a little bit of an influx of students from Dubuque over the last, since last summer, probably up a little bit from what it's been in the past. So, but still not a huge mobility rate. So that's good. Anytime you have consistency of students, that is a positive thing.
When they move out, TJ, they stay in the 84% because they're there until their class graduates.
It's a cohort. It's figured as a cohort. Yes.
Yeah, but we yet count them in that 7%
Of mobility.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's
Stupid.
So what is our actual graduation rate?
Well, the actual graduation rate was, I believe, 90.8. Something like
Yeah, we had 5 students out of 51 that did not get their diploma as of, whatever graduation date was. June
And
1st
how
or
much of
whatever.
those 5 were contributed to the whole COVID fiasco?
Well, COVID directly attributed to all 5 of their falling behind, but at least one or two of them would probably have struggled to have gotten there even without COVID. Just, yeah, not motivated.
The other thing you have to remember with graduation rate is there's a 4-year graduation rate, a 5-year graduation rate, and a 6-year graduation rate. Because currently we have 3 students that were supposed to graduate last year that are working on Edgenuity so that they can attain the credits to graduate. So they won't graduate with their class, but their plan and our hope is that they will attain those credits through online work to be able to graduate. So they will be figured in then in a 5-year or 6-year graduation rate. So there's that piece as well. The summative designation. So we had 1 exemplary school and 2 commendable schools, which is fantastic. So exemplary means that they scored in the top 10% of the state in each category, which is it's not an easy thing to do. So our junior high received the exemplary commendation, and we at the elementary and the high school, they were both in the commendable area. So again, Wes and Darren will get into some specifics about each school, but that exemplary designation is a big deal, and not something that you see very often just because it is such a high watermark. So obviously things are going well in the junior high, but that's also building upon things that have happened obviously at the elementary school and leads to, you know, great things at the high school as well. So the next one is growth on the IAR. Again, I'll let Mr. Hire and Mr. Sirianni talk about the scores when we get to the schools there. The school finances, the district average spending per student, that jumped up dramatically 2 years ago, and it had a lot to do with the ESSER funds that came into school districts. So obviously when you get an infusion of money like we did, those dollars are divided out per student. So, you know, over that year and a half, there was about an extra $1 million spent on kids. So that jumped up. If you remember 3 or 4 years ago, we were around $8,000, and now we're closer to 11. The bottom left-hand corner, the evidence-based funding, we are still running at about 82% adequacy, which means that the way that the state of Illinois figures, we should be receiving 18% more money than what we actually get to fund a district this size with the student population we have, but we don't. So we operate on the funds that we do get. So, you know, the way it looks up there, that's not a big distance between where we are and where we're getting to, but 18%, that's, you know, that's close to 20% of a budget that we don't have. So, so it is a big deal. Chronic absenteeism, the next one, that is the percentage of students who miss 10% or more of school with or without a valid excuse. So over the last few years, we've been telling people, if you got a sniffle, if you got a cough, if you got a sore throat, if you've got a headache, if you got this, you got that, stay away from school. So it's really not surprising that, you know, the way that this is figured, with or without an excused absence, we're going to have a lot of kids out of school. Is it where we want it to be? Absolutely not. That seems high, and it is high. Part of it had to do a little bit with a coding piece from the state as well, but wasn't very surprising that we, you know, saw that number jump up quite a bit as well the last couple of years.
Question on that.
Yes.
Okay, maybe
Yeah.
Darren and Wes can chime in on this. When we talk about absenteeism and what's considered excusable, does that take into account parents that are taking their kids out of school to do maybe a winter vacation, or are those excusable absenteeisms, or are
If they are with a parent or guardian, it is an excusable absence.
Okay, good to know.
That's not to say that we don't have several families that abuse that, or that take more vacations than probably should happen during the school year.
But it's all lumped into this number, right?
Because this is with or without.
This is with or without, so chronic
So
absenteeism.
it can be with an excuse.
Yes, so if you, for instance, last year, if you had COVID, you had quarantined for 5 days. That's figured into this.
Yeah.
If you had COVID once, and got sick another time for a couple days and went on vacation, well, you're now out 13 days and you're chronically absent. So that's why this number is so large. The chronically truant, so that is just your unexcused absence. So that's students who miss 5% of school days without a valid reason. So either the parents didn't call them in, or they skipped, or we didn't have any information of why they were out of school. It could have been that they were sick, but nobody called them in, nobody told us about it. Or we called and found out that they were sick, but we didn't code it as such for whatever reason. So again, semantics, and the state likes to play with that.
I understand the piece about the COVID, that's something that we can't control. Do we have conversations with parents that are maybe taking advantage too much of taking kids out of school for an extended period of time, going on winter vacations and spring vacations, or do we just not cross that line?
No, those conversations happen, but it's also been more difficult the last 2 years because we told them, if anything's wrong, don't come to school.
Okay.
And I think that it's a battle that every school district that has a spring break fights. You schedule a spring break, why? So everybody can leave at that time, and what happens? Well, this family does their work schedule doesn't line up, so their spring break's 2 weeks after our spring break, and then the kid essentially misses another week of school. Or spring break is Monday through Friday, and while our tickets are on Thursday, so we're gonna take Thursday and Friday off prior to the spring break. So, yes, I mean, your question is, do those conversations happen? Absolutely. If it's being abused, but there's been a lot of reasons for people to not come, and, COVID created a lot of situations where it was, rightfully so. I mean, I think myself included, when I had COVID, I was out for 5 weeks because of how sick I was. Darren was out for an extended period of time because the rules at that time were, if anyone in your house has COVID, you have to quarantine. So I think the guy sat in his basement for a month and never felt sick a day the whole time. So, so that's part of it too, so.
Can you clarify, if somebody has a dentist or orthodontist appointment, so they miss an hour at school, does that count towards this absenteeism?
It does add into it, yes.
It counts in the chronic absenteeism, but not the truancy.
So I mean, if somebody has a orthodontist appointment every month, and they're taking an hour out of school on a lunch even, that would count towards this. If they do that 8 times during their school year,
Yeah.
that's
Great.
8 days of, so I mean, that's.
That's why
Great point.
that's why it feels awkward to report on the chronic absenteeism, because it's the excused and unexcused. So, I mean,
And then if you want to add in the last wonderful layer that the state approved is mental health days.
Yep.
They're excused absences now. But they
Yeah.
count.
so every student has the ability to take 5 mental health days. And I don't think we've seen abuse by that, but we've
In a
seen
couple of cases.
it be used,
Yeah.
so.
I think it's a good benefit for a kid to be able to know that, what, I'm struggling, not feeling it.
Yep. But I do like the fact that we have the control to say, okay, you need to take this mental health day. that's great, we need you to get some help, and when you come back, we need you to check in with our social worker and make sure that, you know, you're doing well, or be well enough to be in class, or things like that, so. The next slide, just a quick snapshot again. I will let the principals talk about their schools. But this was the proficiency and growth of IAR, so the growth looks great. Again, they'll get specifically into that. Oh, sorry. Always just nice to have a comparison for where we are in our neck of the woods, so to speak. So this is district-wide, so this is smashing a lot of scores together. When we have this broken down by each grade level for each subject, so you can see where, you know, where we are at the elementary school, at the junior high, at the high school, in these areas, and that's nice to see. Again, this is just a lot of information smashed together, which we'll get into in just a moment. Spending and finances, this is broken it down by school, and this is one that we talk about every year, that it always looks like we're telling the junior high to do more with less. Really, that's because a lot of the expenses are figured into the high school budget that really are for the junior high. So a little bit skewed, you know, but it's something that, you know, they want to say, look at we're the exemplary school with the least budget, so we're doing more with less, and that's not necessarily the case.
Well, and I'm assuming it was the same when you were here, Don. I mean, we don't specify junior high English, high school English, or science, or, you know, any of those things. It all goes into the high school, and then we
Right.
buy what we need for the junior high out of that pot. So.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, oh, yeah.
Just a couple more quick slides here. District spending per school. With changes, that just kind of breaks down a little bit more on the spending. Student information, so we're at 35% low income students. Again, just up a little bit from where we've been historically. It's been hard to measure the last couple of years because the lunch program was free for everyone. So we had some families that were not filling out paperwork at all. This year it's gone back, so probably a little bit more accurate when we go through this next year on that piece.
Well, and we still have some families, I mean, at the elementary that don't want to fill it out. It's just, they don't, their numbers aren't in there. Doesn't mean they're not struggling, just, it's one of those things, they refuse to do that, and be part of that piece.
Yeah, and I think that's true of every district, you know.
Yeah,
There's
I think about
there's
it.
some families that, you know, for pride or whatever reason, they don't want to do the paperwork. So I would say that number is probably low in every school district that I've been in anyway. 20% of our students, just under 20% of our students with IEPs, 0% homeless, 3% English learners, and you know, we hover right around that 20 student mark, and 20 is where the state makes that designation for that. But 93% student attendance. So again, the state average is just under 91, and that's the average daily attendance. So any day of the week we have, you know, about 7% of our kids out or gone for some portion of the day for one reason or another. So mobility and the chronic absenteeism, you see that again. Dropout rate. So now that is the group of kids that are enrolled at the beginning of the year but do not finish that senior year. So that is a much different looking number than the, you know, 84% graduation rate. So the dropout rate tells a much different story. And those are the kids that Mr. Sirianni was talking about for, whether it's motivation or they don't have the credits or they might still be working, but those are the kids that are in that senior class that aren't graduating in that year. And then the chronically truant, and that's the students I was talking about, that miss 5% of school days or more without a valid measure. So those are the kids, you know, when you're talking about where are they, what are they doing, they're the ones that we, you know, we're having trouble getting a handle on what's really going on with those kids, not the 20% that, you know, figure into that chronic absenteeism rate. So, and then some teacher information, just real quick. 21% of our teachers have a master's degree or higher. Our teacher to student ratio is 21:1. Retention rate is 82%. I know that we've lost some elementary teachers in the last few years, and when Wes or myself, when we do an exit interview with them, a big piece of that is the insurance. We're paying just the single plan dollar amount for family plan insurance, so it's less than 50% for those folks. And we had one teacher 2 years ago and 2 teachers last year tell us, you know, the insurance piece is killing me, how much money comes out of my check for that family insurance plan. So that was a different piece than maybe what we've heard in the past. Average salary, you can see there, $44,000, 54 total teachers, 68% teacher attendance. Again, this is a little bit skewed because we had so many people that, you know, if you got COVID or you had to quarantine or whatnot, you know, that skews that a little bit. 100% proficient or excellent on the teacher piece. So.
So let me talk about the elementary piece here for a second. So we kind of, if you jump to the bottom, you get these overall scores. It says 61.83. Thank you.
And so what it is, it's a combination. It's almost like a big, weird puzzle piece that the state kind of has these distinctions for. They've retooled it a little bit. Steve Herkert from the ROE is like kind of the master of these things. He's kind of walked us through it a couple times. Part of it is your ELA and math scores, your science pieces that happen in there, the absenteeism that TJ talked about earlier is a big portion of it and a piece of it. And in order to have the distinction of exemplary, you do need to get, isn't it an 80 overall? Isn't that what it is, Darren?
It depends on the grade levels.
I thought it was, for as a building, I think that's the overall score piece that happens on it. And kind of like, you know, TJ mentioned earlier, it's an incredible feat to get to that part of it. But the good part is, and so from a confidence standpoint, as an elementary school, we're feeling incredibly confident about the trajectory we've done as from an ELA standpoint. Reading and writing, piece of it. We've made incredible growth. Our scores have went up in a great way. And I've been very, you know, quick to praise our staff for all the efforts that they've done and the trajectory on that. And not just these that you see on this, you know, I've yapped about the text leveling before and the star scores, and, you know, all those kind of combinations in the right way. But what has happened is I feel like the math piece has been fairly stagnant, and I just kind of want to speak to this part of it. So typically we see, just so you know, it says, do not, I'm going to tell you this up front, just to call myself out, it says confidential, do not distribute, and I'm distributing it. So I'm just going to say that, so toss them out after if you wouldn't mind. So the state has, thank you, the state has a breakdown. You know, normally we get these IR tests that happen and you never, ever see or have any clue how individual kids do. But they've done a better job, to their credit, of kind of giving us a more thorough breakdown of what our overall scores and pieces look like. So I just pulled out one piece. So our concentration this year as an elementary school is certainly on the math portion of it. You know, we've kind of have the ROE, the Regional Office of Education, working with us a little bit, Deb Interest and Nicole Ambrosia. They do a lot of the PD pieces. And so we've had them in a couple times, and they're working with our teams to kind of delve in on the math piece of it and say, hey, what do we need to do to just equip our kids better? Part of it is, and this is a dangerous line where kids will take this IR test and they do it in April or late March, and they never see some of the skills and standards that they're assessed on. Hard to get mad at kids for that, right? You know, like, I don't know how to, you know, do proportions or you know, multiply fractions if I've never seen that piece before. So what is, to their credit, they finally kind of busted out a piece, and if you look at this, I just kind of give you the overview a little bit. The middle's a state mark, you can kind of see that part of it. The green is the most difficulty questions. Us, we're the green. Those are the questions that we've done really, really well on. The green is obviously above the state line. And then the green is below that piece of it. And they all correspond on the below part is every one of those kind of breakdown letters in the bottom, like the first one, you know, 3F in dot 3A dash 1 is a specific learning standard that the state has laid out. And so this other sheet, they don't necessarily even know if you don't want to bust into it, but it's kind of the evidence statements. It kind of, so we can kind of go through, which is nice, and correspond and delve in and figure out which pieces kids aren't getting and they're not getting early enough, and we can delve in more with them. So we've done some of that work already. We're continuing to do it. I'm incredibly optimistic about kind of the end outcome, but it's stuff in the right direction. It's finally given us a snapshot, which, in all honesty, we've never had before, which has been great. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to, you know, obviously I went way off track, but it relates to exactly what I'm talking about. You know, at the elementary, I feel incredibly great about where we've done ELA, and I feel like the math has been very steady, very, very, very steady. We've had a lot of great conversations with the junior high staff, you know, Julie Schultz, about what it looks like when the kids come to her and the needs and some of the holes and some of those pieces. We've also started this year our peer, I don't know if I've talked about this already, but you know, peer observations where we're having our own staff observe each other, but also come up and observe the junior high staff and getting tidbits of it. And so, you know, Jonathan Rutan, who's our 5th, 6th math teacher this year, has been up watching Julie and talking with her and being part of that conversation as well. Pat, you had a question. Go ahead, sir.
I got a couple. So the zeros here, as far as, you know, the ones that are actually not in, those are the ones that in those math types just are completely not applicable.
Which one are you looking at? I'm sorry.
Like of the zeros in this particular column as they relate to
So there's zeros because the state has like 6 different forms of the test.
Right.
And so when the kid logs onto the Chromebook and they take the test, we didn't have any kids that had that type of question on the test. That's why.
All right, great. So those just didn't apply there.
Exactly.
And then in terms of like how you go back and push those things forward to make sure that they are exposed to them, is that on the individual student level, or is that from like a classroom grade level?
It's more from a classroom level.
Okay.
Yeah. It's more specifically from a classroom level. Do we do the individual piece? Yes, in an RTI aspect of it, but it's more big picture. Hey, here's exposure, here's this. They have this new Meridian site that we've actually started to utilize too, where they've expired, I guess, expired questions essentially is what it is. And then they have the specific breakdown. We actually did about 3 weeks ago in one of our staff meetings, we had all our staff members take the IR test. Like, not the whole test, but we had them do just, here it is, here's a math question for 3rd graders. And then we did math question for 6th graders. I should probably bust it out next month here, just so you have a taste for it. It is ridiculously complicated for what you expect 3rd graders to do, and the level of proficiency and your ability to type and navigate the format that it has laid out on this TestNav site. Anyway, it's great exposure even for our kindergarten teachers to say, ooh, yuck, they gotta do that by 3rd grade? Yikes, wait a minute. So it was a great experience for all of us to walk and talk through that a little bit more. So I know I got off track, but I figured I'd elaborate on it, so.
That's fantastic. So then based on that last piece then is it part of the actual, like, what you would say is issues or challenges that pop up, is the actual navigation to actually complete the test itself?
Yeah, it's an incredible pain. So they did a state kind of protocol thing last year, or a couple years ago, and they said that kids who, because they used to allow you to do, you could take the paper pencil, you could take the online version. They moved everybody to online now, unless you have like some specific disability or something like that. So everybody's gonna move there. But previously, they allowed you to do both. And statistically, kids who took the paper and pencil version were 12% higher than the kids who did the online version because of exactly what you just said.
Okay.
Yeah. But it doesn't matter. Now you just got to get them ready. Regardless of what your reason or rationale is, it's the reality of it. So.
So how do you accommodate them with the additional time to go in and train them on how to do it properly so that they're actually evened up, right?
Exactly. You just want them to be as equipped as possible. Yeah, we don't want to spend all of our time and energy and efforts on one assessment. No, that's silliness. But we also don't want kids to be bushwhacked and not be prepared for this when it comes and that aspect happens. So we're trying to find that healthy balance to make sure kids are ready and prepared and equipped to be successful, but also confident, in all the skills and standards. So.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
You know what, Wes, there's never a balance when you're taking time away from kids learning and teachers teaching.
Yep. That's true.
Just a couple of things to point out. So as TJ mentioned, the junior high did receive the exemplary designation, which, obviously that's what you aim for. But not to belittle anything, but when you break it down, what they're looking at the junior high level and at the elementary level are fairly similar. They want to see the amount of growth that a student makes from one year to the next, and then they look at the proficiency levels. Well, we've scored at the junior high level at the 100th percentile according to the benchmark. Okay, the benchmark being the key word.
Yeah.
Okay. So for the junior high, ELA proficiency was somewhere in the 40 percentile. So that means that if your students score above 40%, then they're considered proficient. All right. At the English, it's a little bit higher than the math. So there's some number playing that goes on with this, but regardless, the junior high students scored in the top 10% in the state regardless. So, they did some great things. And just a tidbit on that, Mr. Wilgenbush, who this year is taking the reins at the high school and junior high of the STAR 360 testing, I think at next month's meeting, we're gonna have some great data to show there, the growth that the students have made from the first 9-week IAR or STAR 360 test to the second one. The kids are showing growth, and it's a one-day, well, not necessarily one day. You take 3 tests in English, 3 tests in math, so it's spread out over 6 days, but it's still that little snapshot. Is the IAR and the PSAT and SAT, is that truly the end-all be-all of whether or not a student is successful or not? Yes, it can be a good indicator, but it's definitely not 100% fail-safe. I think the big thing on the junior high is that 63% achieved the growth that was expected in a year in ELA and 71% in math. So, the kids made growth, and that's all you could ask for. The overall score, as you see there, was 87% out of 100. So, junior high had a good year, a great year, and we'll celebrate that. So, from the high school side of it, 25% of the kids were proficient in ELA, which is in the 80th percentile according to the state, right? So, 1 out of every 4 kids was at that proficiency level, but yet that's the 80th percentile. So there's some head-scratching statistics that are involved in this. The math proficiency, 20%, but that's at the 71st percentile. So, we did as well as could be expected statewide with the ELA and the math. You'd always love to see 100%. You'd always love to see 100% of your kids at or above grade level. Graduation rate, 7 students out of the class of 50 that started
the cohort back when they were freshmen that did not graduate as of, the end of last school year. Freshmen on track, that's a big piece that they look at, and obviously we had a handful of kids that failed a core class last year, whether it was an English class or a math class or a science class, whatever it may be. That's what puts that number where it is. The absenteeism, which we've talked about several times, so then you get an overall score of 64 out of 100. The next time I'll try to bring this, but I'm not good enough with technology to create the pie chart that Steve Herker shows us, but it's got every piece of pie that shows you how much each of those areas is worth when they compute. So it's not like you've got 6 areas and each one is an equal percentage, right? For high school, graduation rate is the largest chunk of the pie. All right, so the fact that, we had 7 kids that were considered not completing that, we lost a large number of points out of that piece of pie, because I think that's almost 50% of our high school score is the graduation rate. So, you lose, you take 83% out of that 50%, you lost a big chunk. Definitely some areas that we can work on and we will work on. But that gives you a little bit of a snapshot there.
So,
Dan?
in that graduation rate, so if they leave here and go somewhere else and graduate, that other school doesn't get credit for them graduating, but we're penalized? Or are they getting credit for them graduating and we're being penalized?
It all comes down to how they code them.
If they move to Iowa, they do get counted on their side.
Right. If they move out of state, it's truly a coin toss as to whether or not a student is ever going to come back on your report as successfully completing anything, even if they did. Just because Illinois doesn't always play so nice with other states.
Oh, yeah, definitely does.
Sorry, I won't go any further on that.
So I think a big thing is, though, if you look at the overall scores for all the schools, there's a little bit of gamesmanship here. So when we meet with Steve, those are really informative meetings. They're really good, because you do learn a lot about your school, and we really dive into the 5 essentials and talk about where are our deficiencies and what are the things we need to get better at. But a part of the conversation is, well, you lost these 3 points here, and if you had those 3 points here and those 2 points there, and that, a point or 2 extra there, that's gonna have an effect on your rating. Some of those points it's worthwhile going after them because you're doing the right work. Some of them, it feels a little bit like, do you wanna play a game to get more points when it's not really affecting what you're doing with kids? So there's a balance there. There's, what's the meaningful stuff? Obviously, there's a lot of things to be proud about for East Dubuque. We've got, on paper, 2 commendable schools and 1 exemplary school, and there's not a lot of districts that can say that. So, we feel good about where we're at. We don't feel like we're there.
Yeah, this is great. I love walking through this stuff and seeing how it all comes into play. One of the things that you had shown early on was the comparison amongst districts between the scores.
And for those comparisons, is there anything that we are able to determine what the schools that are higher are doing that we may be able to do that we aren't doing today? Have you had
Those
conversations?
comparisons were just for the IAR testing.
That was
So,
just that.
Yeah, it didn't have anything to
Okay.
do with your state designations or anything
Gotcha.
like that.
Sorry, I thought those were ratings based on
No, those are just test scores. And it's really interesting because when you look at the breakdown of like I said, so you can look at 3rd grading ELA. Well, Eastland might be at the top, and then 6th grade ELA, Eastland's at the very bottom. So, like I said, it's a lot of information smushed together, but there's definitely some districts that, trend towards the top, and, so can conversations be had? Sure, absolutely. And it might just be curriculum or instruction competitions.
In 10 years, you may be able to draw some conclusions, but in 10 years, this pendulum will have swung twice the other direction, and nobody will know again where that outcome.
Well, the formula for how they figure it will have changed
Yeah.
5 times, and
Yeah.
the way you have to play the game to get the points that you have to get will have changed, but, and that's not to say that there's not good, valuable information, because there is. We've had some really good conversations with the staff based on the 5 essentials that came out last year.
That's
about
all.
some things that they need and need from us, so it's been good. It's been enlightening.
Well, thank you for all you do, thank you all the staff for all they do to get us where we're at, so, thank you.
I agree. It's fantastic to have this reporting, so thank you so much for going through the time and effort to actually produce it and share it with us. Show all that too. It's really, really good information, good mechanisms to have in place to capture it. So thank you.
All right, any other new business? All right, moving on to personnel.
I make a motion that we accept the personnel as stated on tonight's agenda, November 16th.
Second?
It's been moved by Dave, second by Patrick, to approve the personnel as identified on the agenda. Roll call, please.
Dahlberg,
Aye.
Send,
Aye.
Foot,
Aye.
Winters,
Aye.
Kussmaul.
Aye.
All right, moving on to President's Prerogative. We have elections coming up in April. School Board has 3 different positions. Have we had any interest in taking out papers?
There's been 4 at least, maybe a 5th.
Okay, great. Glad to hear that there's interest, so fantastic. All right, that's all I have. I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Dave, seconded by Don to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.